Hey, this is Vu, and today I'm going to be talking about finding the best sensitivity for you. And the first thing I want to note here quickly before I get into it is that a lot of people seem to think that stealing the sensitivity of a professional player is going to help them be better at the game. And in reality, professional players have different roles, different goals, and different abilities in terms of hand-eye coordination, so stealing their sensitivity is only going to hurt you in the long run. You should find the best sensitivity for you and go from there. Now, as for finding that sensitivity, it really is a balancing act here. At high sensitivities, you're going to have good close range engagements, good angle clearing. You're going to get a little bit less fatigue that you might get on really low sensitivities, and you're going to be a little bit quicker in terms of landing flick shots. Whereas at low sensitivities, you're going to have much more consistency, especially in terms of flick shots, and you're going to be better at mid to long range, where a lot of your gunfights will occur depending on your role. Now, to find that sensitivity, what you want to be doing is starting at a good starting spot. And that starting spot is going to be around 400 DPI and 2.0 sensitivity in game if we're assuming here you have a large mouse pad. Now, if you don't have a large mouse pad, you need to find this sensitivity on your own, where you can do a 180 degree flick in a large movement. So you might not use that much of your mouse pad as you're moving around the map, but you want to be doing around 180 degrees in a large flick where you want to be able to turn around, because that is the maximum that you will really need to turn in game. And so a sensitivity around that point is the highest that it needs to go. It really doesn't need to go any higher, and you'll see that evidenced by the fact that most pros use a sensitivity between 1.6 and 2.5. That's where you'll find a large portion of professional players and amateurs alike. They use a sensitivity around here because, like I said, that's around 180 degrees in a large flick. So what I want you to do, find that sensitivity, go into a game, and I would use 0.2 sensitivity intervals. So 0.2. So I'd use 1.8, 2.0, and 2.2 as your sensitivities that you want to try out to find that perfect sensitivity, or at least be pointed in the correct direction of finding that perfect sensitivity. And what you do is you go into a deathmatch or an aim map for about 10 minutes on each of them, and do this one at a time. Don't do all three in a row, then come into this map. So give it 10 minutes so that sensitivity doesn't feel completely alien, and then come into this map and you're going to test your flick shots and your tracking. Now, flick shots are something that will come over time, but you want to just come into this map, practice it for a couple seconds just to make sure you feel comfortable with those flick shots. And for that, I use amount 100, delay 2.5, and duration 0.5. That's what I use. However, when you're newer to a sensitivity, you can slow that down a little bit if you want. Now, for the tracking, what you're going to do is you're going to set it to linear here, change the speed to about 2 seconds, and the duration to about 2. So that's what you're going to find here is you're going to have the speed about 200, duration 2, and that's near the speed of a moving player. So you can really get comfortable with the speed of a moving player when they have their gun out. And so you can just hit start here and then test out your tracking. This is just going to spawn targets in a variety of locations, up and down, left and right, and you can really test that tracking. And this is what you want to have down when you have any sensitivity that you're trying out. You don't want your tracking to be awful, and if you can find that your tracking is good, just check it at different levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, at different ranges, and make sure it's good at all 4, and then you're really going to be on track to finding a sensitivity that you really like. So hopefully once you try out all 3 of those in this specific manner, you're going to find you're more comfortable with higher or lower sensitivities, and what you're probably going to find is that when you're at these higher levels, the lower sensitivities seem amazing, because they will, but when you're at a level like level 1, the higher sensitivity seems amazing. So that's why it really is that balancing act. Now, there are a couple things I want to mention quickly at the end of this video here. First, I want to mention that anybody that's used a sensitivity that's really, really high, I want you to just go and try a sensitivity closer to that 180 degree mark, because as I said earlier, you don't need to be able to turn any more than 180 degrees. Anything higher than that is completely personal preference, and maybe you are one of those players where your personal preference is much higher, but if you've never tried something lower, I would urge you to definitely try something lower, give it a few hours or even a couple of days in terms of gameplay so you can get used to it and then make that decision. Don't just stick with a high sensitivity because you've used it for a long time. Now, the other thing I'm going to mention is wrist versus arm aiming. This is something a lot of people don't really recognize, and it's pretty significant. Wrist aiming is generally people with higher sensitivities will be using their wrist to aim, and that's going to give you a little bit quicker flicks, a little bit more mobility in terms of adjusting quickly on the fly and things like that. However, arm aiming, where you're using your whole forearm instead of just your wrist, is going to make you a little bit more consistent in terms of being able to track corners. If your crosshair placement is good and it's always on their head, it should stay near their head, a lot of stuff like that. And you're going to find a decent spread of players between the both, and you should really try and figure out which one you prefer to use, because if you get to this point where I know a lot of players have done this, where they use some arm movement and some wrist movement, generally you want to minimize that as much as possible. Personally, I use wrist movement. However, I know a lot of people that use arm movement. I actually might want to say it's the majority. However, I haven't really done a survey, but most people I know do use arm instead of wrist. I just feel comfortable with the wrist. Now, the final thing I'm going to mention quickly that I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for, and I've mentioned it before and gotten a lot of hate for it before, is mouse accel. Yes, I think that mouse accel can be beneficial for certain scenarios. Now, the specific scenario and the reason that I use mouse accel personally is because when I op, and I'm an opper for the most part, I find that if I'm single scoping and have a sensitivity good for single scoping, I don't have a sensitivity good for double scoping. I could never get those two sensitivities to line up. So one day I tried mouse accel and it has worked absolutely flawlessly for me since then. And I know a lot of people personally that found that to work for them as well and really liked mouse accel as well. So if you're one of those people that has problems finding a sensitivity that you feel comfortable with in all scenarios, I would definitely recommend considering it for a few days, trying it out, and seeing where you go from there, even though you might not stick to it. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope this helped.